Hey everyone, this is Dr. Chin, and this is chapter 2 talking about different levels of measurement and their importance. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So, how things are measured is very important in our study of tests and measurement, and how precisely they are measured is just our important. So, before we start talking about levels of measurement, let's define a few important terms, specifically what a variable is and what the term measurement means. This is going to be really important for you to know for the quiz as well. So make sure you pay attention, study this, and understand what these concepts mean. So, what do you mean by a variable? Well, a variable is basically anything that can take on more than one value, such as a test score. So a score in the SAT can take on more than one value, such as, I don't know, 750 versus 150. Um, a variable can also be composed of categories that are not necessarily numerical in numbers. So a variable could be what category of color your hair falls into, such as red or black. So notice that the labels that we apply to the outcomes for these variables, they can be quantitative, such as, I am 20 years old, or qualitative, such as Rocky Road or mint chocolate chip, whatever flavor of ice cream floats your boat. So that's what a variable is. Anything that can take on more than one value, and that value can be quantitative or qualitative in nature. Now, when it comes to measurement, the term measurement means the assignment of labels to a variable or outcome. So when we apply the label black to a particular outcome, we are measuring that outcome, and that label can be very precise, such as running 100 meters in 10.7 seconds, or something less precise, such as a single like button for how someone feels about a presidential candidate. So how did it all started? It all began with S.S. Stevens about 70 years ago in 1946. He started to wonder about how different types of variables can be measured and whether the level of precision at which those variables are measured might be classified so they can be more easily understood. Even better, he asked the question of whether a system, or what he called a set of rules, could be developed so that the outcomes that result from the measurement process can be classified based on the characteristics of the variable itself, rather than the actual value or label of the variable. And this is how the idea of levels of measurement was born. Since then, he has gone through different iterative processes, different debates. It was a very lively debate back then as to whether or not psychological variables could be measured at a level of precision that can be quantified. But we kind of get the short summary here in this class, and we'll talk about what the outcomes over the years in this past 70 years, sort of what is a consensus amongst researchers. So important to remember a couple of things. Variables can be measured in different ways. And the way that a variable is measured determines the level of measurement that is being used. So for example, we can measure the height of a person in several different ways. So if you say that, say, people in group 1 on average are taller than group 2, then we have to measure this variable, height, at a level that distinguishes one group from another, in rank or magnitude. On the other hand, if we chose to measure this variable at a level that simply distinguishes groups by a certain number of inches, then it's going to be a lot more precise and informative compared to if we just rank them, like group 1 being taller than group 2. So you got to remember that the level of measurement represents how much information is being provided by the outcome measure. And as a general rule, if and when you get a chance to design your own study. You want to capture as much information as possible, and typically you're going to try to shoot for the more precise levels of measurements. So there are 4 levels of measurement: nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. If you've ever worked with SPSS before and you clicked on variable view, and I think it's when you click on variable type, you should see these different classifications being made available to you. So in this next couple of slides, I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of this in a little bit. Alright, let's talk about the nominal level of measurement. So the nominal level of measurement describes a measurement system where there are differences in quality as opposed to quantity. These are variables that are categorical or discrete in nature. These labels are qualitative in nature, and scores can be placed in one and only one category. That's why we say these scores are mutually exclusive. So the example that's used in your textbook, let's just say there's a guy named Max, and he is in the quote-unquote guppies spelling group. That's just a random name that they just came up with for the spelling group. And another student, Russ, is in the sharks spelling group. Knowing that much information tells us only that Max and Russ are in 2 different spelling groups, not how the groups differ or who is better or how many words Max or Russ can spell, just that they're in 2 different groups. Another interesting factoid that could maybe help you remember what the nominal level of measurement is the word nomen comes from the Latin language, and nomen basically means name, because it's the only distinction that we can make whenever we measure something on a nominal level of measurement. So other examples would be, Republicans versus Democrats, Chevy versus Volvo drivers. It doesn't have to be just 2 categories. You could also have several categories, such as different brands of gas that you might take. They're all just different categories. You can't necessarily rank them in any particular order. Now, if you want to know more about these differences, so the differences between, say, Republicans and Democrats, and if all the information that you had was just Republicans and Democrats, you're kind of out of luck. This is a significant limitation of the nominal level of measurement. If you want more information, you kind of have to dig and define the variable in a more precise way. For the quizzes, you definitely want to be familiar with being able to identify nominal levels of measurement. So right now, think about the real life examples that you've seen in your life where you've seen nominal or variables measured on the nominal level of measurement. Because in the test or in the exam, you definitely want to be able to distinguish variables that are being measured at the nominal level of measurement versus the ordinal level of measurement versus interval versus ratio. So be thoroughly familiar with the nominal level of measurement and the differences between this and the others. So next we have the ordinal level of measurement, which basically describes how variables can be ordered along some type of continuum. Think about ordinal as in you are ordering a set of things. So outcomes are still placed in categories, just like the nominal scale, but they have an order or rank to them as well, such as stronger or weaker, taller or shorter, faster and slower, so on and so forth. So let's go back to the original example of Max and Russ. As it turns out, Max is a better speller than Russ, and right there and then, that statement. That's the only necessary criterion for a measure to be at the ordinal level of measurement. It's simply just saying something is better than or worse than, those types of expressions that describe to you the relationship between the categories. But apart from being better or worse, we can't really tell anything about how good a speller either Max or Russ is, because ordinal levels of measurement don't include this information. So Max might get only 3 words out of 10 correct, and Russ might get only 2. I mean, Max is better than Russ, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Max is still a good speller. He's just better compared to Russ. So that's that's about how much information that we get out of ordinal level of measurements. You can tell if one category is better or worse than the other category. But in terms of the actual intervals behind, which is the name of the next level of measurement, we can't really figure that out. So again, for the purposes of the exam or quiz, you definitely want to know how to distinguish something that is measured at the ordinal level of measurement versus other levels of measurement. So think about real life examples as well. That may help. There's research suggesting that if we can connect new information to things that we already know, so things in our personal life, then that new information is more likely to stick. So anyways, next is the interval level of measurement. And the interval level of measurement gives us a nice jump actually in the amount of information that we can obtain. So we already know that we can assign names, so the nominal level, we can assign rank, that's ordinal level, but it is with the interval level of measurement that we can assign a value to an outcome that is based on some underlying continuum of equal intervals. I want to emphasize equal intervals over here. So for example, not only do we know that Max and Russ fall into two different categories in the nominal level of measurement, we not only know that that Max is better than Russ on an ordinal level of measurement, but we can also know how much better Max is. Sorry, just making some changes to my notes here, my lecture notes. So in fact, let's just say Max got 8 out of 10 correct and Russ got 4 out of 10 correct. Because one of the assumptions at this level of measurement is that it's based on a scale that has equally appearing intervals. So 1 correct, 2 correct, 3 correct. We say that the gap between, or the distance between each levels of measurement is equal. So we can say that Max got 4 more correct than Russ. And that's a lot more information compared to just saying Max is better than Russ. You might be asking like, by how much? So the underlying continuum over here that has equal intervals allows us to make judgments about the score on a particular variable. So again, familiarize yourself with what interval levels of measurements are, know how this differs from, know the similarities and differences between this and the other levels of measurement. Alright, next is the ratio level of measurement. And think of this as like a pyramid scheme almost. Because the ratio level of measurement is the highest level of measurement, or the most precise level of measurement, and because of that, it has the characteristics of all of the other skills that we already talked about. But it also includes one additional important assumption, that there is an absolute zero, which means that there is a complete absence of the trait that you're wanting to measure. So complete absences of constructs or that people may be interested in that have an absolute zero could be amount of rainwater, your weight, your height. All those would fall under the ratio level of measurement. Now we need to make an important distinction here between a zero number that you can obtain on the measurement scale and an absolute zero corresponding to the absolute absence of the trait or characteristic that you're wanting to measure. So here's one way to think about it. It's very possible to receive a score of 0 on a spelling test, right? But here's a more important question actually that would determine whether or not spelling ability is measured at a ratio level of measurement. Is getting a score of 0 on this spelling test indicate that you have 0 of no spelling ability whatsoever? The answer is not necessarily. It just means that only on this test, no words were spelled correctly. And so if you want to know if something can be measured on the ratio level of measurement, you kind of have to think about the construct that you're wanting to measure as well. Salkin, your author, makes the argument that in the trait or in the behavioral social sciences that you rarely ever see ratio levels of measurements. because of the types of constructs that we typically measure. So if someone say got a 0 on an intelligence test, does that mean that the person has 0 intelligence? Not necessarily, because intelligence per se doesn't, it's hard to argue that it has an absolute 0. We can say that we can measure intelligence on an interval scale, but that means that we've just gone one step down. So know what the difference is between a ratio level of measurement compared to an interval level of measurement compared to an ordinal and nominal level of measurement right here. So a couple of questions that you can ask yourself if you want to figure out what level of measurement you are using. Can you assign, are you measuring most of the available information? Actually, I want to add one more over here. Can you assign an absolute 0 to variable being measured? There you go. Can you assign a name to the variable being used? That will determine whether or not you're using a nominal level of measurement. Can you assign an order to the variable being measured? That determines whether or not it's going to be an ordinal level of measurement. Can you assign an underlying quantitative scale to the variable being measured? A scale that has equal intervals, and that will determine whether or not it's an interval level of measurement. And last but not least, can you assign an absolute 0 to the variable being measured? And here's a quick table here that summarizes those questions in a table format and what you would expect for the answers for each of those things. So for ordinal variable, for example, can you assign names to the variable being measured? Yes, so you get a smiley face. Can you assign an order to the variable being measured? Yes. Can you assign an underlying quantitative scale to the variable being measured? No, not really. And if this is a not really, then this is a not really as well. So what's the lesson here? The lesson here is that when you want to try to select a technique for measuring a variable that allows you to use the highest level of measurement possible. And most often in the social and behavioral sciences, it's going to be interval. We want to access the most information available with the most precision, and go to, another factor to take into consideration too that has more of a practical implication is that as your scale of measurement changes with the level of precision, so the way the variables are being measured will probably change in level of complexity as well. As variables are measured in more sophisticated ways and become more complex, they lend themselves better to higher scales of measurements that are more precise. So it's a lot more, I guess, maybe legwork or effort that you need to put into measuring variables at higher levels of precision. So it is there are definitely huge advantages to being as precise as possible, but you gotta take into account the resources that you also have to be able to measure the variable of interest at the level of measurement that you want to measure. Because a lot of times, the real world sometimes demands that certain outcomes be measured in certain ways, such as, say if your boss wanted you to measure a certain variable through archival data that has already been collected. Right, you can't really do anything a whole lot of that if you want to make it more precise, if it's not as precise as it can be, and so that can limit you in regards to the amount of information that you can use. Alright, so we have 4 levels of measurement, 3 of which are commonly used. What can we say about them? Here are at least 5 things, and you can find this at the end of the chapter as well. Number 1, what we measure, be it a score on a test of intelligence, the number of correct items you got on a chemistry final, whether or not you prefer, I don't know, peanut butter or jam. All of these belongs to one of these 4 levels of measurement. So this categorical system that we are proposing to you is quite mutually exclusive. Number 2, the qualities of one level of measurement, such as the nominal level of measurement, are characteristics of the next level up. So, in other words, variables measured at the ordinal level of measurement also contain the qualities of variables measured at a lower level of measurement, such as the nominal level of measurement. Likewise, variables measured at the interval level contain the qualities of variables measured at both the nominal and ordinal levels. Right? So the higher up you go, the more information that you have. You don't really lose on anything other than the effort of trying to collect that amount of precision in your data. Now, third, the more precise and higher the level of measurement, the more accurate the measurement process, and the closer you'll get to measuring the true outcome of interest. Fourth, how you choose to measure an outcome defines the outcome's level of measurement. Ideally, the more precise the level of measurement, the more information you have to manipulate. But also, don't be too disappointed if real-world constraints limit the type of information that you can collect as an outcome, as long as you know what are the limitations of using that type of limited information. And then last but not least, you may notice that most researchers take some liberty in treating ordinal variables such as scores on a personality test as interval level variables. And that's fine as long as they remember that intervals are not equal. This is largely because the types of statistical computational techniques that researchers have at their disposal for the longest part of psychological history has been quite limited to interval levels of computations. Don't be surprised though to see this change in the near future as computers have advanced quite rapidly in the past 15-20 years, and with the advancements of these computers and how powerful they've become, these statistical tools that we have at our disposal is rapidly changing as well. But nonetheless, what you need to know is know the difference between ordinal and interval data, know the limitations of treating ordinal data as interval, because that's kind of what a lot of people tend to do right now. So now that we understand what levels of measurements are and how they work, in our next chapter, in chapter 3, we will turn our attention to reliability. And so I'll see you then in the next chapter. Up till then, all the best studying for this. Take the quiz, work on the quarterly assignment. Let me know if you have questions.